I've got a sensational game to show you, played by two of the most exciting players in the world's elite. We've got Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa against Richard Rapport. Now, currently they're playing in the Uzchess Cup Masters in Tashkent, and this was played today, Tuesday. It's hot off the press. I've just got to show you this. It's amazing stuff. Okay, here we go. Pragg plays d4, knight f6, c4, g6, f3. So this is kind of an anti-Grunfeld move. So if d5, then the idea is that white gets in e4 and there's no exchange of knights here. That's the big idea. But Rapport is content just to transpose back into a King's Indian. So it's the so-called Zamish variation with f3. One of the most challenging variations for black, because white sets up like this and often castles queenside and goes for a kingside attack. And this pawn supports e4, but also can support a push with g4. Knight e2. Now, lots of ways for black to play. I mean, e5, c5 is the most popular. But Rapport, he likes to go his own way. a6. So perhaps looking to break with b5. Bishop e3, yeah, and queen d2. So you can see that this pawn on f3 stops the knight coming to g4. And there could be an exchange of bishops. And perhaps a pawn storm on the king side. So it's really important for black to generate counterplay. And Rapport does that straight away with this pawn sacrifice. Really interesting. It has been seen before, but very, very enterprising. Pragg was not fazed by this at all and just pushed his h-pawn. So if that pawn is taken, then white just carries on with this standard kind of attack, cracking open the h-file. I think I've shown games on the channel where Spassky used to play in exactly this way with white and crushed his opponents. So instead of taking on c4, Rapport decided, okay, I've just got to stop that for the time being. h5. And castles queenside from Pragg. So he's really going for it. Kings on opposite wings and puts the king on the queen side, even though Rapport is already opening things up. And indeed, if pawn takes pawn, then g4 is very dangerous. You just go for it with white. Just open things up as quickly as possible. So Rapport decides, okay, I want to try and open things in the middle, and that's going to make it difficult for white to crack open the king side. So after e5, Pragg decides, fine, closes the middle. So with this bishop locked out of the game and these centre pawns locked, then it could well be possible to go for a g4 break. And at this point, Rapport thought for almost 8 minutes. I should say this is a classical game. It's the time control of 90 minutes plus 30 seconds each time they get a move to get to move 40, and then it's 30 minutes added and 30 seconds increment. Rapport realizes he needs to generate counterplay quickly, so he plays knight b6. So looking to get the knight in here and maybe bag that dark squared bishop. And Pragg decides, instead of pawn takes pawn, allowing knight c4, he voluntarily gives up the bishop, the dark squared bishop, and takes the pawn on b5. And this is a way he's trying to just keep the situation under control. So pawn takes pawn. Now, that does open up the a file. So obviously knight takes pawn would allow rook takes pawn. So king b1. And it looks like white has things under control here. A file, a2 pawn is protected. and this pawn is vulnerable. So Rapport played b4 and then knight b5. And it looks like white is going to take the pawn on b4, maybe support that knight on b5. Now, there's no kingside attack for white, but it looks like Pragg has things under control on the queenside. Right, here is where I would like you to have a think. I'm going to have a drink. Cheers. What would you play with black in this position? What did Rapport have in mind to try and generate play? Cheers. Well, if he tries something like b3, then white keeps the a file closed and little by little surrounds this pawn. This knight is well protected. Actually, white is doing fine here. Potentially queen b4 coming to put pressure on the d6 pawn. Very difficult for black to generate an attack there. So what did Rapport do? This is an extraordinary idea. Knight takes pawn on d5. It reminds me of some of Kasparov's early games, actually, where similarly he wasn't afraid to sack pieces in the King's Indian for long-term compensation. It's an incredible idea. So what about queen takes knight? Well, I suppose this one's the relatively easy to see how black gets played. So bishop e6. Bishop cutting through the queen and looking down here. And this is tremendous for black. If the king steps here, then there's going to be rook d8, and that's a nasty pin. If here, then b3 check. If the king comes back, there's that bishop comes into the game, check. And king d2, again, the pin on the d file. So it's impossible to take with a queen. Not a good idea. Okay, so what about pawn takes knight? Well, this is the game continuation. Rapport gave a check. And the king went in the corner. And then rook a4. So for the moment, black is a piece down, piece for a pawn down. What's Rapport got for it? Well, semi-open a file. These bishops look pretty good. They certainly have potential. But white is a piece up. Knight c1 frees this bishop. The knight protects a2, looks at b3. Is this enough for black? Queen d7. Okay, nice. Supports the bishop. Looks at the knight. Bishop c4. Rook c8. You can see that black's rooks are both in play. White's rook's not looking so good. Be nice to support that bishop with a pawn, but if b3, wow, then we can see the power of the bishops. White's king just is in desperate trouble there. An exchange, rook a5. I mean, all these pieces can just bear down on the king. It's a dreadful position. Look at those fantastic bishops. So Pragg played queen e2, supporting the bishop. e4, opening up the bishop on g7. So if pawn takes pawn, then the bishop will come to g4. Nasty. Bishop b3. An exchange of pawns on f3, which means both these bishops are just flying down the diagonals. Rook a5. Knight is pretty vulnerable. If it steps back to d4, then black can take here, take here. Two bishops. Now, this isn't completely clear, but I think what we can say is that it's very hard to alleviate the pressure on the diagonals. Black certainly has very good compensation, but there's still nothing absolutely clear in that position. But bishop c4 played instead. Now it gets nasty. Bishop c2. great move. If queen takes, then queen takes knight. Bishop takes, rook takes c2, and that pawn is in desperate trouble. Black's got the piece back with tremendous activity. Weak pawn, weak pawn, weak pawn, weak pawn. It's not good. So rook d2. Bishop a4. I love this. This is a good bishop bounce. Hitting that knight on b5, which comes back to d4. And then the rooks connect. And that's pretty nasty. So if b3, b5. And I mean, this is fatal. There's simply too much pressure on the diagonal and here as well. Not to mention this pawn taking, and then the pawn's rolling down the board. White is lost. The king won't escape. Rapport was under so much pressure, he played knight c6. So trying to somehow ease the pressure by forcing the exchange of pieces. Of course, Rapport has to get rid of this knight to re-establish communication between the rooks. So bishop takes knight, and if pawn takes, then queen takes. And with the triple pieces, that's just too much. So knight b3 played. Rook takes c4. So for the moment, Pragg with white is still the exchange up, but these bishops are just fantastic pieces and pressure's too much. I think white's problem is that there are simply no weak points in black's position to attack. Rook c2. Okay, that is attacked, but it's defended very easily by the pawn. Knight c1. Sooner or later, there's going to be problems here. Rook e8 hits the queen, and queen a7. So with the rook gone, then this bishop is free to do some damage, basically. So, for example, if king b1, that can be taken, and b3. That's a very, very neat move. Too much white. So rook takes bishop, pawn takes, and queen takes c4. So after those exchanges, material is now level, but black's pieces are still absolutely wonderful. So effective. This bishop on the long diagonal, that very sensitive point on b2. And this is a wonderful move from Rapport. He understands that this is all about opening lines to get to your opponent, maximizing the force, the potential of your pieces. And he throws this pawn onto the fire. So if queen takes b3, rook b8, that's clear. And the rook and bishop converge on b2. And if knight takes b3, queen b2, hits b2, and then rook e2. And okay, this is pitiful for white. And rook c2, queen is pushed away, and that's that. b2 falls. And if a3, of course, queen takes a3. Pin and win. So after b3, rook d1 played. Exchange of pawns. Queen f2. So material is still even for the moment, but black's pieces are bearing down on b2, and look at these pawns. They're all weak. I mean, all white's pawns are weak. Queen b3 played, and after this move, rook e3, Pragg resigned. So let's just have a look exactly why he resigned. Okay, first of all, the queen is attacked. Well, if it checks at the other end, whoops, sorry. If let's say knight d3, queen takes h4, I mean, black is just picking these pawns off. It checks. If it checks here, then queen a4 check picks off the rook. If queen c2, just rook takes f3. And once the queen moves out of the way, then the h-pawn advances. I mean, white is permanently tied to defending b2. This is just a winning position for black. White just can't prevent these pawns getting picked off. And once again, look at how safe black's king position is. There are no weaknesses in black's position, and this bishop just striking across the board is just a terrible piece for white to deal with. What an absolutely brilliant win from Richard Rapport. I think when you play the King's Indian, you need to play with incredible energy. Otherwise, you can wind up in a really passive position, and in this case, get rolled up on the king's side. So here, b5, really enterprising pawn sacrifice to open up lines. And then a little later on, we had this position and this sensational idea. Knight takes d5. Quite extraordinary. As I said, it reminds me of some of Kasparov's early games when he also gave away pieces very, very freely in the King's Indian. I mean, this is quite sensational. And the way that he built up the attack here was exemplary. Brilliant stuff. Do check out the games from this Uzchess Cup Masters. Such an exciting tournament. We've got, let me see, Adis Torov is actually leading. Maksudlu, Erigaisi, Sindarov, Praggnanandhaa, Yakubayev, Aravind, Rapport and Vohidov. I mean, some of the most exciting players in the world. Young players, all really fighting it out. There are some extraordinary games being played there. So do check it out on whatever your preferred platform is. Thanks for watching.